Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
The soft hum of classical music filled the air, setting a romantic mood in the dimly lit restaurant, its warm glow casting a gentle ambience over the evening. Barbara adjusted her wine glass, tapping her manicured nails lightly against it as she leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Jake across the table. Jake's confident grin widened. His dark hair was neatly styled, and his tailored suit spoke to the authority of a man who was used to taking charge. As head of the marketing department, Jake had the kind of charisma that could command a boardroom and Barbara's heart. Tonight marked a secret anniversary, 6 months since their affair began. For Barbara, every glance, every touch shared across the mahogany table carried a thrilling sense of forbidden excitement. Her eyes sparkled with a mix of joy and mischief as she sipped her wine, savoring both its rich flavor and the intoxicating presence of Jake. Their romance had grown in the midst of office life. Barbara, once diligent and reserved, found herself irresistibly drawn to Jake's magnetic personality during late-night meetings and shared projects. He was everything her husband, David, was not: spontaneous, daring, and capable of making her feel truly alive. David, her husband of 5 years, was steady and reliable, a man who loved her with a quiet devotion and had stood by her through thick and thin. But with Jake, she felt something she hadn't in years: passion, excitement, a spark of electricity that surged through her veins. As she traced the rim of her glass, Barbara's mind briefly wandered to the life she'd left behind for this fleeting passion. David, who had built their life together with patience and sacrifice, was everything she once believed she wanted. But with Jake, there were no routines, no expectations, just stolen moments of wild excitement. Where David offered stability and comfort, Jake represented fire and adrenaline, a contrast that Barbara found herself craving more and more. Her thoughts were pulled back to the present as Jake's voice filled the air. His hand rested lightly on hers, sending a jolt of energy through her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his deep voice soft. Barbara smiled, tilting her head coyly. "Just how lucky I am to be here with you tonight," she replied. Jake grinned, clearly pleased, and raised his glass. "To 6 unforgettable months," he toasted. Barbara echoed him, her voice steady, though inside, a quiet battle raged. She was breaking every rule she once held dear, yet her heart raced with defiance. After all, there was only one life to live, and she wanted it all, rules and morality be damned. Jake leaned in, his fingers gently wrapping around her hand, his dark eyes glinting with mischief. "Are you thinking too much again?" he asked softly. "Maybe you're worried about your husband, David? By the way, how's he doing?" Barbara let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "Oh, everything's fine. My husband's like any other husband, though he's been a little on edge lately. He visited his parents at their ranch a couple of days ago. Hasn't seen them in a while, and he's especially concerned about his father. He's getting older, and David feels guilty for not visiting more often." Jake raised an intrigued eyebrow. "A ranch? I never figured David for the cowboy type." Barbara giggled, a blush creeping across her cheeks. "Oh, trust me, David's no cowboy. He's too calm and kind. His personality just doesn't match that kind of spirit." Jake smirked, his voice teasing. "A real man should passionately love a woman, take risks, be adventurous. Not some gray worm." His words hung in the air, charged with playful defiance. Then, with a wicked grin, he leaned closer. "Now, me, I'm a real man. And after dinner, we're going to have a race, a real love race." Barbara's cheeks flushed deeper, laughter escaping her lips at his audacity. She tilted her head, her voice turning flirtatious as she responded, "Is that so? Well, I think I'm up for the challenge." "A love race, huh? And what exactly does that involve?" Barbara teased, her voice soft as she leaned in closer. Jake leaned forward, his lips just a whisper away from hers. "Let's just say it's not for the faint of heart. You'll have to trust me," he murmured, his voice low and confident. Barbara was about to offer a flirtatious reply when their conversation was interrupted by the waiter, who arrived with 2 covered desserts, placing them on the table. "Excuse me," Barbara said, furrowing her brows in confusion. "We didn't order dessert." The waiter smiled politely, his hands clasped behind his back. "It's a gift." Barbara turned her gaze to Jake, her eyes sparkling with both suspicion and delight. "Honey, maybe you arranged this surprise?" Jake leaned back, a smug smile on his face. "Oh, I'm a master of surprises. But come on, ordering dessert? That's way too small for my scale." The waiter chuckled softly and stepped away, leaving the two of them to stare at the mysterious desserts before them. Barbara laughed, the tension from earlier melting away. A gift, huh? Maybe the universe is sending us a sign. A little cosmic approval of our arrangement. Jake raised his wine glass, his grin confident. To signs from the universe. They clinked glasses, their laughter blending with the soft hum of the restaurant. The moment felt surreal, perfect, even as if their clandestine relationship was somehow blessed by fate. The atmosphere shifted as Jake reached for the lid of his dessert, lifting it with a flourish. Inside, an elegant piece of chocolate cake was topped with glossy icing, with a Joker playing card stuck in the center. Jake tilted his head, a half-smile forming on his lips. "What the hell?" he muttered, plucking the card from the cake. "I don't get it. What kind of stupid joke is this?" Barbara, sitting across from him, felt a pang of unease at the sight of the card. Her fingers drummed nervously against the table as she reached for her own dessert. Slowly, she removed the lid, revealing a similar piece of cake. But atop hers was something more, a glint of metal. A cherry impaled on a ring sat perched on top. For a moment, Barbara's breath caught in her throat as her mind jumped to a romantic conclusion. "Jake," she said, her voice nervous, holding the cake closer. "I have a ring. Are you really—" Wait. Her voice faltered, and her heart dropped as her eyes widened in horror. "Jake, this is David's wedding ring." Panic surged through her chest. Her hands trembled as her mind raced. How was her husband's ring here, in this restaurant? Her thoughts spun, each possibility more terrifying than the last. She stared at Jake, but he seemed more annoyed than alarmed. They sat in uncomfortable silence, each trying to process the bizarre turn of events. Then, a shadow fell over the table as a man impeccably dressed in a crisp suit approached. Without invitation, he sat down, his presence radiating authority. His sharp, steady gaze carried the precision of someone used to command. Barbara and Jake exchanged bewildered glances but didn't speak. "I beg your pardon, ladies and gentlemen," the man said, his voice calm and measured. "I won't take up much of your time." His composed demeanor contrasted sharply with the chaos at the table. Jake, ever brash, leaned forward. His expression hardened. "What the hell is going on? Who are you? And what kind of twisted joke is this? Are you looking for trouble?" The man remained unflustered. "My name is William," he said, his tone unwavering. "I would ask you to remain calm. There's no need for aggression." From his jacket, William pulled out a slim leather folder and handed it to Barbara. "Before the lady opens this, I have a proposition for you, Jake." Jake's eyes narrowed, suspicion clouding his expression. "I understand you're a man who enjoys a good gamble," William continued, nodding toward the Joker card still clutched in Jake's hand. "My client has a simple request. A bet, $50,000. If you're willing to make the wager, you can walk away tonight without further consequences." Jake burst into laughter, the sound echoing loudly enough to attract a few curious stares from nearby tables. "Are you serious? Perhaps you also want me to strip on the table and dance for the audience? This is insane. Who's pulling the strings here? David? Is he your client?" William's smile didn't falter. He nodded once, confirming Jake's suspicion. Barbara's fingers fumbled as she opened the folder William had handed her. Her gasp was audible as her eyes fell on the contents. Divorce papers, already signed and ready to file. No, this can't be happening," she stammered, her voice trembling. "How did this even? What is this?" Jake glanced at the papers, his expression turning smug. He leaned back in his chair, gesturing dismissively. "Barbara, baby," he said, his voice dripping with bravado. "I'm sure it's nothing. Don't worry about it." It seemed that David had decided to take a bold stand. Jake's response was nonchalant, as if it didn't faze him. "So what? It's not a big deal. Honestly, it's about time you cut ties with that fool," he said, shrugging it off. Barbara's voice faltered as she tried to explain. Her mind was still reeling. "Jake, you don't understand. David and I have so many unresolved financial issues, and now he's filed for divorce, out of nowhere. I don't even know what's going to happen." Jake leaned back in his chair, trying to project confidence. "Relax, Barbara. We'll get a good lawyer, and your David will be begging for mercy before this is over." He dismissed William with a wave of his hand. "As for this ruined evening, I'll take care of him. I'll show him his place before you even have to think about what happens next." Barbara's hands trembled as she opened the folder William had given her. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw the contents. Divorce papers, already signed, ready to be filed. "No, this can't be happening," she stammered. How did this even? What is this? Jake glanced at the papers with a dismissive smirk. Barbara, baby, relax, he said, his voice oozing with confidence. It's about time you dumped that puppy. This whole thing is nothing. Barbara's anxiety only grew as Jake's callousness sank in. Her hands shook as she held the divorce papers in her lap. But Jake, this is serious. Before she could finish, William spoke again, his voice calm and steady. So, you're refusing my offer? He asked, his tone almost wearied. Of course, I'm refusing, Jake retorted, his voice rising. Why should I listen to some guy who thinks he can dictate terms to me? Let him go to hell. And you, get out of here too, or I'll call the staff to throw you out. William remained unfazed. I'm sorry, he said simply. No need to make a scene. I'll leave. Barbara has a surprise waiting for her at home. Good night. With that, he turned and walked away, his polished shoes clicking softly against the restaurant floor. Barbara's heart raced. A surprise, she echoed, her voice trembling. What is going on? Jake, I need to go home right now. I'm scared. Jake remained calm, flashing her a reassuring grin. Relax, Barbara. I'll go with you. Don't worry. I'll handle everything. You're with me now. She didn't respond, her thoughts swirling. Jake paid the bill and let her out, his upbeat demeanor a stark contrast to her growing sense of dread. The drive home was tense. While Jake hummed along to the radio, Barbara stared out the window, her mind filled with anxious thoughts. What if David is waiting for me at home? She asked softly. Jake chuckled, dismissing her fears. Even better. I'll have a little chat with him and put him in his place. Barbara didn't feel reassured. Maybe we shouldn't go. This has gone too far, Jake. But Jake interrupted her, his tone still light. Come on, Barbara. He's already filed for divorce, and he's got the papers ready. What's the difference now? Let's face the consequences, and I'll teach him a lesson. Barbara swallowed her fear, but it didn't ease the growing pit in her stomach. As they pulled into her driveway, her heart sank. The lights were on inside the house, glowing eerily through the windows. Jake parked with a flourish. Let's get this over with, he said, stepping out of the car with confident strides. Barbara followed him reluctantly, her steps heavy with dread. She knew whatever awaited them inside would not be good. As they entered the house, the silence was palpable. Barbara flipped the light switch, revealing an eerily quiet home. She glanced around, half expecting David to jump out from the shadows. But there was no sign of him. In fact, most of his belongings were gone. Jake chuckled, glancing around with satisfaction. See? I told you. He ran off like a coward. Probably back to his parents' ranch. Barbara didn't respond. Her eyes scanned the room, uneasy. Something wasn't right. Then, her gaze landed on the kitchen table where a sleek black folder rested, its presence conspicuous. A chill ran through her as she approached it. She opened the folder, gasping as she read the handwritten note inside. Darling, I know everything about your double life. I have 3 months' worth of evidence. Divorce is the only way for you to atone for your sins. But there will be consequences. And by the way, look in this folder for some information about your impudent lover. Barbara's heart raced. She flipped to the next set of documents, photographs and printouts that left her breathless. The images were of Jake, with other women, one at a restaurant, another at a hotel lobby, a third laughing with him at a bar. Tears welled in Barbara's eyes as she held the evidence out to Jake, her voice barely a whisper. What is this? Jake, what is this? Are you seeing other women? Barbara's voice quivered as she held up the photos. Jake's expression shifted from anger to a defensive smirk. This? It's a pathetic fake, he said, leaning closer to point at one of the images. Look at this one. It's clearly doctored. This woman? She's just a former client, a contractor I worked with. And this one? He jabbed at another photo, his tone quickening, is just a college friend. Sure, I was polite and friendly, but that's it. These are just photos from casual conversations. They're twisting things to make something out of nothing. Barbara sniffled, wiping her eyes as she tried to process his explanation. So you're saying these are all misunderstandings? Jake placed his hands on her shoulders, locking eyes with her. Absolutely. These photos are just designed to hurt us. It's all part of David's twisted game. Look closely. Do you see me kissing anyone? No. It's clearly fake, designed by a good editor. These are lies, Barbara. You can't let him get to you. Barbara hesitated but nodded, her doubts easing under Jake's reassurance. However, inside, Jake was seething. his mind racing for more excuses to cover up the damning evidence. He couldn't let Barbara suspect him, not now, especially with David's manipulative tactics at play. Barbara turned back to the folder, her blood running cold as she read the next note. Tell Jake that if he wants, he can make a $100,000 charitable donation to my account. It'll clear his conscience, and he can breathe easier. Jake's face twisted with fury as he read the note. This is insane, he roared. 100,000? What does he think this is, some kind of mob operation? He grabbed the papers, tearing them to shreds with raw anger. I'll tell you what's going to happen next. Tomorrow, I'm hiring the best damn lawyer in the city. We're going to destroy David in court, just like I'm ripping these papers apart. This ends now. Barbara watched him, a swirl of emotions running through her as Jake's fiery determination temporarily soothed her nerves. She clung to the belief that Jake was a man who would stand by her, no matter what. After tearing up the papers, Jake threw them into the trash and turned to Barbara. We're not letting him win. Trust me, Barbara. I've got this under control. Barbara wiped away her tears and nodded slowly, Jake's confidence spreading a small sliver of hope. The tension seemed to ease as Jake poured 2 glasses of whiskey, sliding one toward her. This will help you relax, he said smoothly. Barbara took the glass hesitantly, her mind still racing. Jake leaned in closer, his gaze intense. Let David go. This is your house now, without him. Let's make a statement. Barbara blinked, taken aback. Jake, I don't know. This feels strange. Jake grinned, his confidence unwavering. Strange? No, it's victory. It's us showing David that he doesn't own you anymore. Trust me, you'll thank me for this. His words, his tone, and his unrelenting charisma slowly wore down her resistance. Eventually, she relented, and he swept her into his arms, leading her to the bedroom. The next morning, Jake dressed sharply for work, fixing his tie as he spoke. Don't worry about a thing, babe. I'll cover for you at the office. I'll tell them you're sick and need a couple of days off. I'll also focus on finding a lawyer and putting together a plan to take down your bastard husband. Barbara nodded, still groggy but somewhat reassured by his confidence. Jake kissed her cheek and left for the day, leaving her alone in the house. As the silence settled around her, Barbara stared out the window, holding a cold cup of coffee. Maybe this is for the best, she murmured to herself. To hell with David. I'll have a different life now. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. A notification from her bank appeared on the screen. Your account has been frozen. Panic flooded her as she scrambled to log into her banking app. Her heart sank as she saw that the joint savings account had been emptied. All of it, transferred into separate accounts she couldn't access. Frantically, she called David, but the call went to voicemail. Her anxiety grew as each second passed, until her phone finally rang. It was David. Barbara answered with a mix of anger and desperation. David, what did you do? You froze my account and took our money. You're being a coward. You made a show of handing over documents yesterday, but we need to talk about all this. If you don't, I'm going to be very angry. David's voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge of disappointment. Barbara, you made your choice. You'll get your explanations in court. Until then, I'm done discussing anything with you. You can't just, Barbara began. But David interrupted, his tone firm. I'm not interested in listening to you anymore. You didn't even bother to call me last night. Address all your questions to my lawyer. The line went dead, leaving Barbara trembling with fury and fear. Desperate for support, she dialed Jake. After a few rings, he answered, his voice unusually dry. Barbara explained what David had done, freezing the bank account and taking all the money. Jake listened calmly before replying. Barbara, we've got a problem. What now? She asked, her voice breaking. David is a sneaky bastard, Jake said, his tone turning serious. He's already informed the big bosses at the company. He told them about us, about the affair. Barbara gasped. What? What did you tell them to justify it? Jake sighed heavily. I told them it was a misunderstanding, that your husband is going crazy because of the divorce. I said he's paranoid and trying to ruin both of us out of spite. Did they believe you? The bosses are giving me some leeway. I'm a valuable asset to the company, so they're turning a blind eye for now. But I need to clean this up quickly. Barbara clutched her phone, her voice trembling. What do we do now? Jake's voice turned sharp and commanding. I'm looking for a lawyer. I'll involve some influential friends to make sure we win this. But Barbara, I need David's number. I have to talk to him man to man. She hesitated, unsure if giving Jake the number was the right choice. But Jake's confidence reassured her once more. Okay, she whispered, reciting David's number. Jake jotted it down. Don't worry, Jake said, his tone softening. I'll handle this. Barbara hung up, her nerves frayed but holding on to the hope that Jake would keep his promises. Jake paced the floor of his office, his phone pressed to his ear, his hand clenched into a fist as the line connected. The moment he heard David's voice, Jake launched into a tirade. Listen, you little punk, Jake growled. You've started a dangerous game, and you don't even realize what you've gotten yourself into. You've crossed all the lines, and now this is personal, a vendetta. David's silence on the other end only fueled Jake's anger. He continued, his voice dripping with disdain. But I'm giving you a chance, David. Divorce Barbara without any of your little tricks or schemes, and explain to me why the hell you're talking to my management about me and Barbara. You better fix this, apologize, and admit that it's all a misunderstanding. Do that, and I'll forget about you. Otherwise, Jake let the threat hang in the air, his tone menacing. David's faint chuckle came through the phone, followed by his calm response. A bet, he said, his voice dripping with confidence. That's all I offered you, Jake. A bet in the form of a charitable contribution. Consider it compensation for the damage you helped cause to my marriage. Barbara will bear full responsibility for her choices, and so will you. But you, Jake, your arrogance and impudence, those piss me off. Jake gritted his teeth, barely holding back his fury. Oh, you think you're clever, huh? David ignored him and continued, his voice composed but firm. Here's my last offer, Jake. Make a charitable contribution to my account, $200,000, and I'll ensure your nerves stay calm and your conscience gets a little clearer. Jake's voice exploded in rage. You think I'm going to roll over and hand you that kind of money? Who the hell do you think you are? I'll crush you like a bug. You hear me? I have real friends, powerful ones. I'll bring in the best damn lawyer money can buy, and you'll regret ever messing with me. David remained unshaken, his tone as composed as ever. You're welcome to try, Jake, David said coldly. But mark my words, you'll suffer for every step you've taken. The bets are made, gentlemen. His voice turned icy as he finished. Goodbye, Jake. I have nothing more to say to you. The call ended abruptly before Jake could throw another insult. Jake slammed the phone down on his desk, muttering curses under his breath. That smug little bastard, he growled. He thinks he can play with me. But deep down, a small, nagging voice he refused to acknowledge began to stir. For the first time in a long time, Jake felt the unsettling sting of uncertainty. The first day of the divorce trial erupted in a storm of revelations. David and his lawyer presented a mountain of evidence, photographs, messages, and detailed accounts of Barbara's secret meetings with Jake. Each piece painted a vivid picture of their betrayal. Barbara's lawyer, a sharp-tongued man with a knack for stalling, objected to the immediate admission of the evidence. Your Honor, he said smoothly, these materials require thorough verification. Until their authenticity can be confirmed, we cannot allow them to unfairly influence the court's proceedings. It was a clever move, buying time for Barbara and Jake. Jake smirked from the gallery, silently commending the lawyer's strategy. Time was exactly what he needed. Time to pressure David to use his connections and resources to make this whole ordeal disappear. When the hearing ended, the judge adjourned the case until the next session. Barbara looked visibly shaken, but Jake reassured her with his usual bravado. Don't worry, babe, we've got this. Just give me a few more days, and I'll make sure David wishes he'd never messed with us. As Jake wrapped up calls to friends who could help him corner David, his phone buzzed. The name on the screen made his stomach drop. Boss? Jake. The boss said curtly when he answered. I need you in my office. Now. The line went dead before Jake could respond. Something about the tone of the call suggested trouble. Trouble Jake might not be able to charm his way out of. Jake entered the boss's office, his usual confidence diminished but not entirely gone. The boss, a sharp man who rarely minced words, gestured for Jake to sit. Jake, the boss began, his tone cold. Frankly, just for that murky story with Barbara, I should have fired both of you. But I turned a blind eye, believing your explanation, until now. Jake immediately launched into a defense. Sir, I'm her boss. I couldn't abandon her while her husband's clearly unhinged. There are court hearings coming up, and once that's sorted, everything will calm down. The boss frowned, tapping his fingers on the desk. We're not here to talk about your personal drama, Jake. I've received some very disturbing information. Jake stiffened, his stomach tightening. What kind of information? The boss leaned back, his gaze unwavering. It seems you've been involved in fraud, mismanaging the company's advertising budget, funneling money into shell companies, and pocketing the difference. The details are extensive. Jake's mouth went dry. That's ridiculous. I'd never. The boss raised a hand to silence him and pressed a button on his desk phone. Moments later, the head of security walked in, followed by another man in a sharp suit. This is a friend of mine, the boss said, gesturing to the man. He works in the department for investigating financial and economic crimes. For now, this investigation will remain unofficial, but we're going to verify everything that's come to light. If it's true, Jake, you're looking at massive fines and possibly a criminal case. Jake stammered, his confidence cracking. I don't know where this is coming from. Someone's trying to ruin me. The boss tilted his head, scrutinizing him. By the way, Jake, do you play poker? Jake froze, the question catching him off guard. No. I mean, not really. Just occasionally for fun. The boss slid a folder across the desk, opening it to reveal photographs. They showed Jake sitting at a poker table in dingy backrooms, surrounded by unsavory characters. People say you sometimes win, sometimes lose big. Jake's face turned pale as he struggled to form a coherent response. This isn't what it looks like. It's just, I wasn't. It's harmless. The boss's expression remained icy. Harmless, Jake? You've put this company's reputation on the line. From this moment forward, you're under scrutiny. Every move you make, every decision. It's all being monitored. Jake left the office under the watchful eye of a security guard, his mind racing. Back in his own office, he collapsed into his chair, clutching his head in despair. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen. A message from David. Merry Christmas, Mr. Confidence. Jake slammed the phone down on his desk, frustration boiling over. Moments later, it buzzed again. This time a call from Barbara. Jake, she began, her voice filled with worry. Can we meet for dinner and discuss an action plan? We need to figure out what to do, Jake. Barbara's voice trembled, desperation in her tone. Jake, his patience at its breaking point, snapped back. I'm not going to solve other people's problems, Barbara. Figure it out yourself. Why the hell did you even drag me into this mess? Jake, please, she pleaded, but he cut her off, his voice cold. I have more important things to deal with. Bye. Without hesitation, he hung up and blocked her number. Barbara sat on the edge of her bed, her face buried in her hands as tears streamed down her cheeks. The weight of her decisions crushed her. She had lost everything. David, Jake, and even the life she had once taken for granted. Just days after Jake's betrayal, Barbara received devastating news. She was being fired. Her boss cited the public scandal, explaining that the company couldn't afford the damage her drama had caused to its reputation. On the same day, she learned that Jake was under investigation for financial fraud at work. Her divorce case concluded swiftly and brutally, with David's overwhelming evidence ensuring she received nothing. No assets, no financial support, only the legal fees for her own lawyer. Desperate, Barbara had to take out a loan to cover her debts. Eventually, she secured a new job, but it was a far cry from her previous position. Her salary was modest, and her responsibilities tedious. Every day, she was reminded of how far she had fallen, and every night, she cried herself to sleep. Jake, once brimming with confidence and charm, now sat in his small, disheveled apartment. His lawyer had warned him that the fines for his fraud were just the beginning. Jail time was likely. He stared at the evidence David had amassed, realizing the thoroughness of the investigation. The truth was undeniable. David had uncovered not just his affair with Barbara, but also the fraudulent shell companies and embezzlement schemes Jake had orchestrated. Jake's darker side had been fully exposed, with the Rayall investigation beginning after David's anonymous tip. His rage toward David burned hot, but there was nothing he could do. David had outplayed him, and Jake knew it. Meanwhile, David sat in the quiet comfort of his parents' ranch, his heart lighter than it had been in months. He thought back to William, the private detective he had hired. The man had been worth every penny, collecting overwhelming evidence not only against Barbara but also Jake. It had been an expensive endeavor, but for David, honor and dignity were priceless. Now free from the weight of betrayal, he focused on what truly mattered, family and rebuilding his life. He had no need to gloat or seek further revenge. He had already won. As he watched the sun set over the horizon, David felt a sense of peace. He was ready to leave the past behind and start anew. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.